morning. My name is Councillor Gary Crawford, and I'm Chair of the Budget Committee. I'd like to call meeting 34 to order, and I'd like to welcome everybody here. Today's meeting is being held with members of the Budget Committee participating by video conference, and city staff are also connecting to the meeting by video conference. The public continue to participate electronically and can watch the meeting streaming live on YouTube at youtube.com/Toronto City Council Live. These measures are necessary, of course, because of the public health guidelines and prevent the spread of COVID-19. Members and visiting councillors, this is a special meeting of the Budget Committee, the launch of the 2022 rate-supported budgets. The agenda material for this meeting is available online at toronto.ca/council, but please note that today's presentations will be posted online once they begin, so you can follow along. Clerk's IT staff will be available to members of council to help with your devices. I ask for patience, as always, if we experience any delays or technical issues during the meeting today. When voting on an item or a motion, I ask that members ensure they turn on the video to raise their hand to indicate their vote. If there are any visiting members of council attending the meeting, I encourage you to turn on your video so that I know and others will know that you're present if you want to ask questions of staff or speak. This will also assist the clerk staff to record attendance for the meeting. Although we are meeting in different locations and meeting remotely today, the committee would like to acknowledge that the land we are meeting on is a traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. And we also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 of the Mississaugas of the Credit. First order of business, declarations of interest on the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act. Is there any interests? Seeing none, we will begin. Today's agenda consists of one item, the 2022 rate-supported budget launch. City officials are going to make presentations on the staff-recommended 2022 operating budget and 2022 to 2031 capital budget for Toronto Water first, then Solid Waste Management Services, and we'll end the morning with Toronto Parking Authority. The review of the 2022 rate-supported budgets will be considered at our next regular budget committee. That'll be on Friday, November 19th. That agenda for the meeting will include the staff-recommended budgets for the rate-supported programs and briefing notes previously requested by City Council to be submitted to the 2022 budget process, and any other budget or briefing notes that may be requested today. Staff are working towards making the agenda ready to publish on Thursday or Friday of this week. Public speakers on the 2022 rate-supported budget will be heard at the Budget Committee on Friday, November 19th. And the public, of course, can register to speak on the 2022 rate budgets by emailing the Budget Committee clerk at buc@toronto.ca. That is it. We are ready for the presentations. Can I have Toronto Water? I believe Lou will be up first from Toronto Water. So members, just a reminder, I know there's one briefing note request that has come in. If there are other briefing note requests needed, just to get them to the clerk, and we'll at the end of the meeting we'll approve them all.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's Lou DiGeronimo here. Just waiting for the presentation to be loaded up. The clerks can coordinate that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, it looks like Diane Chester has the presenter and can just start the presentation and share her screen.
There it is. Okay. And slideshow. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Budget Committee members. We'll start the presentation on the next slide, please. We're seeing the slide deck with the double slide. Can you make a single slide? Okay, just go to the next slide, please. Okay, so Toronto Water manages one of the largest municipal water utilities in North America. We're operating 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we provide 3 essential services, namely safe drinking water, wastewater collection and treatment, and stormwater management. We provide these services 24 hours a day to over 3.6 million people in Toronto and portions of Peel and York region. Every year, we supply over 435 billion liters of safe drinking water through our 6,100 kilometers of water mains. We also collect, treat, and return back to Lake Ontario over 400 billion liters of wastewater annually. And we protect public and private lands by maintaining safe conveyance of stormwater through over 4,900 kilometers of storm sewers. The 2022 budget is designed to collect $1.447 billion in revenue to pay for all operating costs and a substantial capital program. The 2022 budget reflects funding for the largest ever capital budget for Toronto Water. The 10-year capital plan is fully funded with no identified capital constraints. Specifically, the stormwater funding program supporting basement flooding and wet weather flow projects are funded based on the ability to deliver projects with the current resources we have in place. The long-term focus on fixing our infrastructure has started to show benefits to our residents. One particular measure we look at is the annual water main breaks. We have been able to reduce annual break rates to below our target level for the past several years during normal winters. Another improvement is for permanent surface restoration after completing a repair within the public right-of-way. Each year, Toronto Water completes an average of 8,500 excavations for repairs and upgrades, and today approximately 5,000 of these cuts proceed to permanent restoration on an expedited basis. Our goal is to minimize the time between excavation and permanent restoration. In 2020 and trending in 2021, 60% of permanent road restorations have been completed within 12 months. In 2022, the target is to increase this to 80% being completed within 12 months. We continuously monitor and track the work that we do using many different metrics so we can demonstrate the outcome of the services we provide while keeping an eye on being effective and efficient. And we have been achieving many of our targets on many different operating and capital metrics. Toronto Water staff have developed an automated performance management system that tracks over 100 different customer service and operational measures. And they use this data to make better decisions on day-to-day service delivery and long-term capital planning initiatives. If we look at past financial performance, going back to the last 20 years, we have achieved our long-term financial management goals of keeping operating costs stable while directing the majority of annual water rate increases to the capital program. Over the past 20 years, operating costs have increased slowly, while capital spending has gone from under $200 million in 2001 to well over $1.2 billion for 2022. We have done our best to keep commitment made to ratepayers that rate increases would be used to fix their infrastructure. In 2021, there is a projected loss of $13.7 million in the sale of water and private water agreements due to lower consumption impacted by weather in the summer and stay-at-home orders and closures and slowdowns in the industrial, commercial, and institutional sector in particular. This slide, if you look at it, will show you the differences of the last 2 COVID years in comparison to a normal year of 2019. There have been savings from some hiring delays and other underspending that will offset the COVID-19 related revenue losses. The loss in the sale of water is not considered to be permanent, as many sectors of the economy are beginning to open up again in late 2021 and will continue in 2022. There are no significant impacts to service levels as a result of COVID-19 for Toronto Water. There are a number of risks and challenges, though, that should be highlighted for 2022. Staff are concerned with the potential impact of inflation for certain capital projects, partly due to supply chain reliability problems caused by COVID-19. We are closely monitoring current tenders, and in the event of high pricing, Some projects may have to be deferred until prices stabilize. These measures are prudent and may need to be taken to ensure there is an adequate reserve balance to fund the State of Good Repair program as outlined in the 10-year capital plan. It is also important to keep investing in technology that puts customer service, cybersecurity, and efficiency first. As an example, some of the newer technologies being deployed by Toronto Water is improving the online monitoring of sewers during extreme weather events. This information provides us with the ability to respond to problems before they occur, increasing our operational resilience and minimizing basement and surface flooding. Some of our key priority actions for 2022 include continuing to improve our customer service levels, developing workforce strategies to ensure that critical, vulnerable, and hard to fill positions are processed effectively, and building resiliency in our operations and infrastructure to deal with extreme storm events while improving environmental quality. Now we'll get into some of the details of the 2022 operating budget submission. For 2022, we are requesting an operating budget of $471.2 million to run the daily operations, which is a year-over-year increase of $2.4 million, or about a half a percentage point as compared to last year's approved gross budget. Of note, the capital contribution will be increasing by $29.2 million, or 3.1% year over year. So the vast majority of the rate increase will be dedicated to the capital program. This year's budget also has a request for an increase in staffing by 42 positions, primarily to deal with managing the impacts of and planning for such a large capital program over the next decade. For the end of 2021, we are still forecasting a surplus of about $12.5 million. If we look at some of the key cost drivers in the 2022 base budget, we started with a pressure of about $8 million. We were able to find expenditure savings of $5.6 million, leaving that year-over-year increase of $2.4 million, or that half percentage point that I mentioned earlier. Of the new position requests, 32 positions are required to deal directly with the capital program. We've been running a large capital program with the same staffing complement for many years, and we're beginning to strain those resources. So 16 of those new positions are designed to help integrate the new assets that are being constructed into our existing operations, while the other 16 positions are required to help us plan, program, and assess the future 10-year capital plan. 8 of the positions are needed to complete the final phase for the successful transition of the utility cut program, and 4 positions are needed to support development application reviews, which will be funded from permit fees. And then finally, this is offset by a reduction of 2 positions associated with the construction of the Eglinton LRT as it slowly winds down. Funding for the 2022 budget is primarily from the sale of water, which represents about 91% of the revenue stream. The remainder of the revenue comes from user fees, other revenues, sale of water to York Region, and transfers from our capital reserves. A breakdown of where the operating funds are spent is shown here. The majority of the operating budget is used to procure a variety of goods and services, including chemicals, hydro, equipment, materials, and supplies, while 13.2% of the budget is to pay for salaries and benefits of staff. Of particular note, the capital contribution for 2022 will be the highest ever at $975 million, or 67.4% of the total revenue collected. We look at the details now of the capital budget and the 10-year plan. The 10-year capital program is forecasted to be just over $15 billion over the next 10 years. The planned capital budget for 2022 is $1.4 billion. The largest component of the 2022 capital budget remains the State of Good Repair program. However, there is a significant increase in the service improvement and growth component over the next 10 years as funding grows for basement flooding and wet weather flow projects. In 2017, the province of Ontario enacted a new regulation requiring municipalities to prepare asset management plans. For many years, Toronto Water's core assets were reported at a book value of over $28 billion. In 2021, Toronto Water's asset management plan was completed, and the updated replacement cost of Toronto Water's infrastructure is now $83 billion, as reported in a separate report at last week's executive committee meeting. The updated replacement valuation was calculated in accordance with the requirements of the new regulation and takes into consideration recent appraisal reports for facilities and average unit rates for pipe installation based on recent bid pricing. This slide here shows you a comparison between the historical asset value that we have shown you for many years for each of our service areas and as compared to the updated asset valuation of $83 billion as contained in our asset management plan. As mentioned previously, the 2022 capital budget request is $1.4 billion gross. Next year's budget will allocate 48% of funding to state of good repair projects, while 31% of the budget will fund service improvement projects such as basement flooding protection and wet weather flow programs. The funding of the 2022 capital budget comes from planned water rate increases, from development charges, and from the sale of water to York Region. We've also obtained funding support from the federal government's Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund for two very large basement flooding tunnel projects. Here is an overview by service area. The 10-year capital plan of $15 billion includes $4.4 billion for water treatment and supply projects, $6.6 billion for wastewater treatment and collection projects, and $4.1 billion for stormwater management projects. That includes the critical investments for our basement flooding and wet weather flow master plan. Here's another view of the 10-year capital program showing a breakdown of funding across different asset classes and key programs. The upgrading of existing treatment plants, facilities, and underground infrastructure accounts for over $10 billion of that total, followed by $2.2 billion for basement flooding and $1.8 billion for stormwater management. The growth of the funding for the 10-year capital program comes primarily from the rate increases, future development charges, and the sale of water to the region of York. But also includes a total of $110 million of funding support from the federal government's Disaster Mitigation Adaptation Fund. On this slide, you see the federal funding at $105 million, and that's because we plan to spend about $4 million of that federal support money during the 2021 year. And as you can see, if we stick with our long-term plan, this funding strategy will virtually eliminate the state of good repair backlog over time. Now we'll get into the calculation of the water rate. We'll start first with trying to estimate consumption and water production numbers. So water production volumes in 2021 were impacted by COVID, as you can see from the red line, particularly during the winter and spring of this year when we had many closures. The drop in consumption for some industrial, commercial, and institutional accounts due to COVID-19 closures was discussed earlier in the presentation, and you could go back and look at that slide to see the year-over-year reductions for the past 3 years. In addition to that, during the summer months of this year, it was cool and wet for several weeks, and these weather conditions impacted peak summer water use. And you can see that with the red line terminating at a low point in August, while last year we had a very hot, dry summer, which gave us a bump in consumption and added to our revenue stream. If we look at total water consumption across the years, it continues to decrease slowly despite having significant population growth. That is why we have forecasted a 0.5% annual consumption drop in the 10-year rate model. This is also a good indicator of improved water use efficiency. we are serving more people while having to produce less water every year. The water rate model also assumes a capital expenditure rate of 85% of gross budget and future year rate increases projected at 3% per year over the 10-year modeling period. Despite the rate increases over the years, Toronto Water remains very competitive with residential water rates, as we have the second lowest in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area. For industrial customers, the water rate remains competitive, as we are in the lower tier of municipalities. If we look at the impact of water rate increases over time, residents have adjusted consumption patterns to offset some of the impacts of the rate increases. Average annual consumption per household has now dropped from 324 cubic meters per year to 230 cubic meters per year. With the 3% rate increase, the average homeowner will see an annual increase of $29 for the 2022 billing year. This would mean that the average household would be paying about $2.68 per day to fund the operating and capital needs for drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater services. To sustain the long-term capital plan and to keep the pay-as-you-go funding strategy in place, we will need to continue to plan for 3% rate increases per year to sustain our program. Thank you very much, and we're open for questions if the chair so wishes.
The chair does wish. Thank you very much, Lou. Appreciate that. I can get up the screen so I can see everybody. There we are. We'll go to outside councilors as usual. So, Councillor Perks, you're up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Lou. I suppose my first question, so looking at the service levels you just provided for us, all of those seem to be service levels from pandemic years. Do you have on hand, or could you get by the time this comes back for further discussion, your service levels in the last year before the pandemic to compare to what we've got here?
Yes, we could go back and provide several years. We have that data, and we could easily put together, if you would like to see a 5-year plan.
Sure,
do that.
That'd be great. I just want to understand, I want to make sure that services are coming back up to pre-pandemic levels. That's what I'm curious about.
Fair enough. We'll put together a note if you so wish, yeah.
Good. Have you reviewed this plan that you're putting in front of us against the city's CO2 targets?
Yes, we, in fact, if we go to some of the slides, trying to see if we have it here. It might be in the analyst notes.
Oh, okay. I don't have those yet.
Oh, okay. So, in fact, there is on the slide 23, you'll see a check mark, some of the program areas. And that's where we are highlighting in the slides and in the analyst notes that it supports the climate resiliency and or greenhouse gas reduction targets. So we have highlighted the various projects that we're doing that are in line with those council policies and goals.
So the analyst notes will give more detail on that, eh? Okay.
You will get more detail in there, yes.
Okay. In terms of the water consumption per household, I know that the business consumption is a whole other issue, but per household, you and I have had many conversations over probably 20 years now, going back to even before I was elected, about the importance of trying to achieve much lower water consumption rates. And we've had conversations about how a good comparator would be some of the European countries where water consumption is much lower. Do you track that?
We do track the water consumption, and we do get data from other municipalities across the world. I was looking at that number myself because I do recall our conversations, and we seem stagnant. We seem stuck at the 230 cubic meter number. So I did go back, and so if you look at the presentation and look at the residential consumption, I think the blip over the last couple of years is because of COVID. So where we've seen a reduction in the ICI use, there has been a corresponding slight increase in the residential use, as more people have been at home, working from home, and more people using water while they're there. So it's hard to continue to do that analysis. We'll have to normalize our numbers as we return back to work and people start leaving the home. But there are things.
Could I just?
There are things that would drive us.
I'm running. My clock's running down.
Go ahead.
You know, from those conversations, you'll probably recall that Canadians use about 3 times as much water at home as Europeans do. And I was wondering if anyone in your organization spends time looking at ways to get our number to move towards their number, because of course, the less water we pump, the less energy we consume, and the easier it is to meet our climate targets.
So we do have a group of staff that are in our customer service area. They're focused right now on helping more the commercial and institutional and industrial sectors. So we're targeting that group to continue with water efficiency measures. And then we put out a communications program where we continually tell our homeowners about the benefits of conserving water and reduce consumption.
Okay.
So that's where our focus has been on the ICI sector.
Thank you. Final question. Over the last several months, during the variance reports, it's become clear that in a number of the professional disciplines, the City of Toronto is having difficulty retaining and hiring people in professional disciplines. Are you fully at the fully approved staff complement for people in professional disciplines?
No, we have seen our vacancy rate rise over the last year and a half. We are at one of the highest levels over the last few years. The challenge that we have is in some of those professional positions, so engineers, senior engineers, but it's compounded because Toronto Water has some very technical positions as well in comparison to other divisions. So plant operators, for example, critical position, takes us about 4 to 5 years to train someone up to a level 4 certified operator. We are short in that area right now because of retirements that are occurring. So yes, we are challenged with finding staff and attracting them to come to the city. That's why I put that as a priority action item. It's on my slide, and we need to look at focused hiring in those areas.
Thank you very much, Lou.
Clerk's taken into committee. We have Councillor McKelvey to start.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How has your capital program been impacted during 2020 and 2021? So what is your percentage spend be? Are you on schedule, behind? Where are you?
So we are ahead of schedule, actually. So we're forecasting that we'll close out the year ahead of our 85% target, likely around 90 to 91% completion rate. Last year we had a very good year. We were in the 90s as well. So with the impact of COVID, it hasn't impacted our capital program at all. We've been able to carry on and complete our work. In fact, get more work done.
Great. The stormwater goals for the City of Toronto. So what is the current target to have no stormwater overflows into the lake? And do we have any federal or provincial asks out on the table to find a way to accelerate that? So what is the target if we do it alone, and what is the target if we can get help?
Right. So if we carry on with the capital plan as identified, we're showing you just the 10-year time frame to complete all the work to deal with combined sewer overflows and improvements to our storm system. We go well into 2038, 2039 time period in order to complete all of those projects based on our ability to finance these projects alone. So at the present time, as I mentioned in the presentation, we do have some federal funding only for some stormwater projects, and that's specifically to deal with some basement flooding concerns. We do not have any funding commitments that would match our commitment from either the province or the federal government for any of the combined sewer overflow projects at this time. We continually search and ask for their involvement. In fact, we did achieve one thing at least. and that's recognition of the importance of these projects, the Don River and Central Waterfront projects, within the updated Canada-Ontario agreement that supports the International Joint Commission agreement between Canada and the US for the Great Lakes. So at least we're mentioned in there. There's no funding support, however.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor McKelvey. I have Councillor Carroll actually, and then after that, Councillor Nunziata. Councillor Carroll, I think you're, and Councillor Layton, of course, after that.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm going to save most of my questions for whatever is our next opportunity, because it's kind of hard when all we have is a PowerPoint presentation and that's it. And we weren't able to look at it until it started to be presented. The other budgets being presented this morning are not online yet. Is there a reason why we're holding it back and waiting till the last second and then we're asking questions? Can we get the other budgets that are being presented this morning up online?
Matthew, can you
Yes,
maybe answer that? Thanks.
Yeah, yes, Mr. Chair. I understand there's also been some feedback that it was difficult to follow. We will post all three of those presentations now for the request of the committee here. It's been our practice in the past to post presentations as they happen in the committee. We've just been following that practice, but I understand the issue here. We'll post all three.
Yeah, given that we have no other materials, it's kind of hard to ask intelligent questions. So I'm not going to ask the intelligent ones, but I will ask the obvious one. And that is, you've outlined a number of needs that you have to meet, the great state of good repair demands there and the improvements we need to the system. But the water rate increase overall is still 3%, which I assume is to cover those things. But I'm wondering how your capital work might also be affected by inflation. We have pretty rampant inflation, and I would think it's going to affect some of the supplies and things you need, A, to operate the water treatment plant, and B, to buy capital project supplies. So is that 3% going to help you, or are we suppressing reserves in order to get through this inflationary spike?
It's too early to tell, and that's why I identified it as a 2022 risk. We are concerned with inflation, but we're tracking our tenders very, very closely right now. I'm alerting Budget Committee at this point in time. The good news of our program is we've got over 60% of next year's program under contract already, with fixed price components in place. The bad news, we still need to tender the remaining portion, which is about over $700 million of new contracts to be let late this year and in 2022. So that's where we have the risk, is on that amount of money. And if we are starting to see all of our tenders go over budget, we may need to come back to Budget Committee and seek some direction and advice on whether we proceed with certain projects or not. In the past, what we typically do with the reallocation reports is, we accommodate some projects that will go higher because we have some projects that come in under, and we do the reallocation reports and use the cash flow that council provides us appropriately so we can keep moving the capital projects forward. Our concern, though, is if we get successive capital projects, especially big ones, that all come over budget, we may not have that ability just to do reallocations, and we may need to seek direction. So this is more of a heads up to Budget Committee. That's a concern that we're watching, and we may need to come back with a special report on it.
So yeah, because I understand for the last few days it actually spiked to 4.5%, but mostly based on agricultural and consumables. But you would still want to be leaving reserves as they are. We would simply have to start looking at pushing some projects out to later years.
Yes,
okay.
That's what we would have to bring to you, right? There's certain projects we would not recommend deferring. We might just still have to proceed with them, but then we'd have to find a way to finance it. And that typically would mean by deferring other projects that are less critical. So those will be the tough decisions if we have to make them. The risk that we face is we procure a lot of goods and services from across the world. We buy our equipment, and the equipment comes from everywhere. So if you get into some of the supply chain issues and the delays, that could be problematic for us. So we need to keep an eye on that.
Okay, so you're doomed now. When every quarterly variance comes out, I'm going to read yours first.
Fair enough.
Thanks.
That's why I gave you the heads up.
Councillor Nunziata.
Yes, and actually, I'm just going to expand on that. My concern is what you determine less critical. So, you know, you mentioned that there may be projects delayed because the increase in costs and that. So are you saying that you're going to give us a list of what you feel is less critical on delaying projects? Like, I'm concerned about the Rockcliffe one, Lou.
Yep. No,
20 years in the making. And so I'm concerned when you make those comments.
Yeah, so those types of consideration do factor in on whether we consider them critical or not, and whether we move them forward for deferral or not. So when we put forward the allocation reports, we do present to you projects that were accelerated, projects that were deferred. And so if we run into this problem where we do not think we have enough cash flow, we would come back and we would identify projects, and we'd use that matrix of what we consider to be critical projects that have been in the queue for many years. So some of the large basement flooding projects are critical projects for us, and they take a long time to tee up, and to defer them impacts our coordinated capital program as well. So we won't make those decisions lightly. We'll be looking at other projects in some of our other facilities, if we can defer them or not, where they don't have as much direct service level impact.
Well, for example, the Rockcliffe one, we have invested money in that with TRCA.
Yes.
So you're not going to defer a project where we've actually spent millions of dollars on to start the project, which that would be crazy, right?
Those are some of the decisions that we would make, and the considerations that we put forward of whether we say we need to proceed with those projects. We have done that already. For example, one of the larger basement flooding projects that we just awarded a contract this summer did come in over budget, and our recommendation to budget committee when we did the reallocation report was to fund that increase, but we were able to accommodate that with savings from other projects. So that's how we prioritize it. They are important. If they've taken us many years to complete, you know, that does rise higher on our priority list.
Okay, thank you.
Very much. Last will be Mike, Councillor Layton. Sorry.
Yes, thank you very much. And it can be Mike for you, Gary. Don't worry.
Okay.
Just first, did I have that number correct? 2038 around the combined sewer overflows. And how much of that is how we track them? Because we got into a conversation earlier in the year about this, and you explained it really well. The way tracking them takes some time, because every year you're kind of finding the source, you're working your way back along the source. How much is that process taking us to 2038, and how much is us could we fast track that work, and if so, how fast could we advance it in the capital plan?
So the two different components. What you described, our previous conversation, was the all-fall monitoring program, where we're going into our existing sewers to try to find cross connections or damage to infrastructure that's polluting our waterways. That carries on, and we do that every year and every season. We have to wait till the summer till we can get into those ravines and valleys to do our work. So we do pause in the wintertime. There is no disruption to that program. We will carry on. The one that I was referencing specifically is the Don Central and Central Water, the Don River and Central Waterfront CSO projects. We'll pick up the combined sewer overflows in the Don River and the Inner Harbor, and it would connect the Western Beaches Tunnel together with that Inner Harbor Tunnel, taking it to a treatment facility over at Ashbridges Bay, and we will treat that combined sewer overflow, not through the treatment plant, but through a different treatment plant on the landform, and then go out into the lake better treated. That will improve our water quality. That's the program I'm talking about. It is quite significant. It's in the order of magnitude $2 to $2.5 billion. And if we wanted to accelerate it, our latest review is we could only reduce it by a few years because we have to sequence a series of key projects. and that's the tunnel work right now. So for example, the Dawn Tunnel, we're about 60% complete. That tunnel boring machine is north of Bloor Street now, and it will continue on to go to the top of the Coxwell. What we're doing right now is designing the inner harbor component. We would like to start accelerating the construction of that if we could get financing and funding for that. And we don't have that additional monies. So we have to sequence these big projects based on the availability of cash flow that we have in the 10-year capital program. That's why it's taking that long. It's a combination of sequencing and financing.
So we don't have the financing in place in your capital budget? That's not presented in your...
We do in the long term. So
okay.
It's funded, but you have to go out past the 10-year window.
Let's talk about that 10-year window, the wet weather flow master plan. There was a time frame for that. How are we doing based on the initial time frame?
So the initial time frame when that was presented was 25 years, and I think it came out in 2003. That'll take us to 2028. So all told, we'd be about 10 years behind on implementing that. One of the big issues that impacted that was the creation of the basement flooding program. When the wet weather flow master plan was tabled in 2003, the city did not have an ambitious basement flooding program. In fact, it was just a subset of the wet weather flow master plan, and it was a small component. After the storm of 2005 and then subsequent storms, council asked us to increase the basement flooding component, and now that's a sizable program on its own. That's why we present it separately. And that did impact our ability to finance and deliver the wet weather flow master plan.
Could I just have a couple more questions. One around lead pipes. How far along are we, and are we achieving the goals that we had for addressing lead pipe replacements on the city and the private side?
So on the overall, let's call it the lead mitigation strategy that council approved. Good news there is that the work that we did in the treatment plant has provided the buffering, and lead levels are very low throughout our system because of the addition of the phosphoric acid at our treatment plants. With respect to the actual removal of lead services, we've been below our targets, and that's primarily because of the approach we're taking. We're only changing out the city portion on capital projects where we're doing water main replacements. And the water main replacements right now have been in areas, not in residential areas with lead services. So there's been a reduction there. But in addition, we do have still in place the program where homeowners can access their lead service replacement program. Or if they want to change out their private lead portion, the city will do the city portion. That continues, and we do get several hundred requests a year. We're down to probably about 24,000 in our estimate now. Originally, it was about 75,000 households that had lead services still. So we continually drop, but it's at a much slower pace right now.
If I could beg the indulgence of the committee, I have just one more line of questioning. It's just two questions. One, on slide 23, you have a stormwater management as 12%, but if you start factoring in basement flooding, right, there's some overlap, and you start looking at plants and facilities, there's some overlap. So stormwater management isn't exactly at 12% of your operation, your budget in the capital plan.
No, in fact, you should add the basement flooding with it. So you combine those two.
And then how much of plants and facilities would go into that basket? I'm looking for a number of what is the stormwater number?
Capital. So yes, there is some component within the plant side, particularly at Ashbridges Bay, where some of the work there actually is in coordination with our stormwater and the CSO program. So we could pull out those details and provide you that number separately. But we'd have to go into the specific capital projects that we have.
I think it'd be really useful, Lou, for us to have a conversation specific, for us to be clear about the changes in cost of stormwater in our rates as a component of our rates as well. So I'll be looking for that information going into our next meeting.
Sure.
So
Fair
if you could
Yeah.
do that, I would just like to see that forecasted out about what the cost of stormwater, given what the expectations are as a result of inclement weather and climate change. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Councillor Layton. Any other questions that I think we're through everybody? Thanks, Lou. Appreciate the work and effort and time you provided us today.
Welcome.
We'll be talking on the 19th. Next presentation will be from solid waste. Matt Kelleher is here. There you are, Matt. Welcome.
Good morning, Chair and Councillors. Just give me a second here. Yep. Is the presentation up in full screen, Mr. Chair?
It is. Thank you.
Perfect. So thank you, Mr. Chair and Councillors. Matt Kelleher, General Manager of Solid Waste Management Services, and I'm just going to review our 2022 operating budget as well as our 10-year capital plan. And first, I just want to thank the solid waste team who helped prepare this budget, as well as members of financial planning and BPF&A, who are very strong supporters of everything that we do in solid waste. And thank you for all your help, not just with the budget, but with everything that you do for the division. Solid Waste Management Services is made up of 5 key services: city beautification, which is litter and parks cleanup; solid waste enforcement and education; the collection and transferring of the materials when it's collected from your house or place of business; the processing of that material and transporting it to the appropriate facilities; and then residual or landfill management. The service outcomes that align to the program are really that, waste is collected in a timely, safe, reliable, and efficient manner, and that waste is managed in an innovative, environmentally friendly, and fiscally sustainable manner. The outcome measures that the division has developed to align to those outcomes are, from a health and safety perspective, maintaining or reducing the number of at-fault accidents that we have within the division. There's been a very strong investment over the past number of years with a new training facility, introducing Drive for Life training, and as well as the telematics and additional supports on the vehicles. From an environmental standpoint, when we're looking at the program, we've onboarded the Dufferin Organics Waste Management Facility biogas facility this year. And so you can see in 2021, we have started to produce renewable natural gas that's now being used across the city. In 2022, again, we will have a full year of operation of that site. And then in 2023 is when we anticipate the Disco Road facility to be brought on board. As you can see, we'll be capturing 100% of the biogas that's generated from organics. And then we have another 100% bump up in 2028. And that's when our planned 3rd anaerobic digestion facility will come online. From a fiscally responsible, sustainable approach to the division, we've been using a 3% blended increase year over year within our 10-year planning horizon in order to fund our capital program, which I can say is fully funded, and there is no gaps in that program. And when we're looking at from a materials management standpoint, the amount of material that goes into our blue bin and into our green bin isn't always materials that should go into the blue bin or the green bin. So when we look at the green bin, a little less than 80% of the materials that make its way into the green bin are compostable. And when we look at our blue bin, a little less than 70% of what makes its way into our blue bin program is recyclable. So we've done a number of different operational pilots this year, whether it's with dog waste or adjusting our our litter bins, just to see what works in order to determine what would be useful from a diversion standpoint to implement much broader across the city. The other piece too I want to highlight in this year's budget, we've also increased the funding for education and enforcement and communications to bring us back up to the levels that we saw before COVID-19. From a service level measure, there are no changes in this year's budget to any service levels except for community environment days. I just want to draw your attention to that line. So historically, we've had in-community events, and throughout the pandemic, we had to shift quite nimbly to be able to provide community environment days at our drop-off depot. So this year we had 14. Next year, we're planning on 51 in-community environment days plus 7 drop-off depot events. And the reason why we're using our depots is residents, really appreciated being able to come in and see, solid waste in action, looking at our facilities and being able to use those assets to provide that service. So, it's something that we've learned from the pandemic, and we are going to evolve into our overall program operation. The other item I want to draw your attention to is the service reliability of waste collection. So the division has over 70 million annual touch points at the curb with residents' material. And based on that, we are 99.97% reliable that we will collect your garbage on the day that you put it out. Of course, there might be a miscollection here and there, but it's very small. And the reason why we're able to continually meet this very strong service objective and outcome is with the continued support of council and the funding of the overall program and our asset management structure to help make sure that the trucks are on the road and we deliver the service. The key risks and challenges for the division, these are not new. These have been highlighted for the past couple of years within our budget, but these are not strictly related to the City of Toronto's key risks and challenges. These are industry-wide across the province. So we've been planning for the anticipated transfer to extended producer responsibility and the regulations being approved by the province. They did approve those regulations this year, and the city will be transitioning to a extended producer responsibility framework in 2023. But we will be returning to council mid next year with an overall plan of what we've been able to negotiate with the producers on a full cost recovery basis to provide that service for them to our residents, or if they decide to take over that program themselves of collecting and processing recyclables. From an organics processing capacity standpoint, right now the city generates around 170,000 tons of material, and we have the processing capacity for around 130,000 tons. So 40,000 tons are sent to a third-party processor. With the growth that we're going to experience, not just within the City of Toronto, but the GTHA, there is a high demand for organics management facilities. And we are through constant funding from council with our 3% anticipated rate increase or forecasted rate increase. We are able to move this program forward much sooner than what was originally planned within the solid waste strategy that was delivered 5 years ago. And finally, landfill capacity constraints. So again, a provincial-wide challenge. The province has approximately 10 years of useful life of landfill capacity for the entire province, and there's not much in the way of new facilities being brought on board. So there is a risk from a provincial standpoint of not having disposal capacity for the growing population and the growing amount of materials that's being generated. With regards to Green Lane landfill, we have approximately 14 to 15 years left of that site based on the space that's remaining. So less material goes in. Of course, we have a longer lifespan, but we need to aggressively plan for the future because it takes around 15 years to site a landfill. And in terms of COVID-19, there is no anticipated impacts for 2022 budget. So the 2022 priority actions for the division, I've already went through the blue box, organics processing, and landfill capacity. So I'll jump right to climate change and resiliency. Based on the program funding that we have, we are able to aggressively move forward with capturing the biogas as well as landfill gas that's generated from our landfills and our organics management facilities to capture that gas and turn it into renewable natural gas that can be consumed instead of natural gas or diesel throughout the city. And we are aggressively moving forward with that program. The other priority actions relate to returning to pre-COVID service levels. So when we're looking at solid waste in general, there was no real reduction in service levels except for the transitioning of in-community e-days to transfer station or depot days. And like I mentioned before, those were a success, and we want to continue with that program, and that's being communicated within this budget. The other piece as well is communications and education. So last year and this year, there's the majority of the communication focus has been on COVID resiliency, immunization. And so what we were not able to do is get as many campaigns out as we had in the past, just due to the prioritization of COVID. And because of that, last year's budget was reduced because within the program, we don't want to request funding when we know we're not going to be able to allocate it to those needs. And you'll see that later on when I get into the capital program. So the education and communications budget is also increased. And again, when we look at impacts from COVID, there's a higher uptake in residents and visitors using our parks. So we've aligned some more resources into parks and litter management. From a utility rate stability standpoint, again, we've developed our long-term budget, our 10-year forecast with a 3% blended rate. And with that, we have no unfunded capital, and our capital program is able to meet the needs and the strategic direction of council. When we're looking at extended producer responsibility, the other piece that we need to build into this is the utility rate review to make sure that what residents or customers are receiving in terms of a service, that the fees that they pay for that service align to the work that they get from us. So we brought in a utility rate consultant who's reviewing our rates, and we will align updates on this when we return with extended producer responsibility updates over the next year or so. And last but not least, our continued effort on health and safety, aligning to our Vision Zero initiatives on our collection fleet, whether it's telematics or side guards, enhanced driver training, and our promotion of our health and safety and compliance unit within the division. So from a climate lens, with the investments from council over the past number of years and the projected 3% forecasted rate increase over the planning horizon, we are able to invest over $200 million into climate resilient projects, whether that's the third anaerobic digestion facility, landfill gas, or the development of a net zero administration building for our staff. And when we look at the outcomes of this investment, we are able to, once the program is fully online, reduce the amount of CO2 equivalent annually by over 100,000 tons each year. So the outcomes and the financial ability to meet these outcomes are critical to not just the division, but the city as a whole. For our 2022 operating budget, our gross revenue and cost for the services is $390 million. And out of that, $13 million is being allocated to our capital program. Last year, during the budget process, we outlined that in 2022, there would be $13 million being allocated to the reserve and capital program. And I'm happy to say that we came back with that number. And when we look at the 2023 transfer to capital to fund our program, we're at $12 million, and that's the target to come back next year in the budget. And again, ensuring that line of accountability is clearly in sight on how much funding from our rate goes into our capital program to fund all of the very strategic initiatives that have been outlined in this document and have been put forward by council. So a breakdown of our 2022 operating budget by service area. The vast majority of our increases are related to consumer price index changes, the cost of labor, fuel, and the increased amount of material that's being generated that has to be managed by staff and by contractors. The one area I do want to draw your attention to is under the expenditure line, the solid waste education and enforcement. So again, back to that ability to spend, we believe we have the ability to spend more on communications and education this year. Hopefully COVID-19 is nearing the rear view mirror. And so we feel very confident that we can spend the money in this year. And as I mentioned before, it was reduced last year only because we did not believe that we'd be able to spend that money just due to the overall communication strategy focusing on COVID. The funding for the program, the vast majority comes from rate revenues, and the other revenues would be from tip fees or from stewardship funding through the province or stewards. So our capital program, the solid waste has approximately $750 million of capital assets, and that ranges from landfills to collection yards to green bins. And within our capital program, with that amount of assets, we have around 1/3 of our capital program going to the state of good repair, around 1/3 going to service improvement, and a little bit over 1/3 going to legislative health and safety, which the majority of that component is for landfill development throughout the years at Green Lane. When we look at our 10-year growth capital program, the majority of our funding, as you can imagine with the amount of assets that we have, is maintaining those assets as well as developing our landfills. And so 600+ million goes towards those two major long-term initiatives. When we look at the long-term solid waste management strategy, the organics processing facilities and biogas, around $200 million is allocated to those strategic initiatives. And the overall capital program is split almost 50-50 between recoverable debt and reserve draws. To date, we do not have any provincial or federal funding aligned with our program. When we look at the 10-year capital plan, the years of 2024 to 2027 in that light blue, that is the service improvement and growth, which really captures the third anaerobic digestion facility and our renewable natural gas strategy at the landfills. And then on the back end of the 10-year program, in 2030, 2031, the dark blue is health, safety, and legislated, which the vast majority of that is developing either an expanded landfill, a new landfill, or other residual disposal methods, which will be needed for 2034, 2035, when our projected life of Green Lane has expired. So our capacity to spend, when we look at the capital program, 2022 has the least amount of carry forward, which means that we are spending what we've asked for in 2021. It actually has the least amount of carry forward in the past 5 years. So we are very focused on not only spending the capital that we have and within our program, but making sure that what we ask for, we can spend. And that's something very critical, that we want to ensure that whatever funding we ask for, whether it's in operating or capital, that we spend that where we've communicated to council that it would be spent. And when we look on the right-hand side of this chart, this really highlights our ability to spend over the past year and the increased focus that the division has had in ensuring that capital dollars are spent. And a lot of this coordination happens with PMMD and DPF&A and financial planning to help manage the cash flow. But when we look at our spend rates for health and safety, state of good repair, and service improvement, they are the highest rates of spending in the past 5 years. And the majority of those spending dollars in 2021 are the highest spending dollars, not just spend rate, but dollars in the past 5 years as well. So there's been a very strong focus within the division to only ask for what we know we can spend, and smoothing out our capital program to align to cash flow and the resources that we have within the division. And because of that, and with the continued 3% recommendation this year, and then our forecasted 3% that's being used within our rate modeling, We do not have a backlog of any capital requirements within our 10-year program, and our 10-year capital program is fully funded. So thank you very much, and open to any questions.
Thank you very much, Matt. Questions? Councillor Carroll, you had some questions. I think you. Oh, sorry, Councillor. Oh, yeah, right, Councillor Perks. Apologize.
Yeah, I'm the new Councillor Davis. Matt, thanks for all of that. I was wondering, in previous year presentations, if I recall, we used to show trends in diversion rates. Do you have that kind of stuff available?
Absolutely, Councillor. We can get that for you, no problem.
Okay. And similar to what I asked Mr. DiGeronimo, is it possible to get service levels compared to the last pre-pandemic year, full pre-pandemic year, so that we can see how if we're returning to those service levels or not?
Absolutely, Councillor. So there is a mention in the slide deck of our service levels over the past number of years. So there is no change in our service levels, except going back to full in-community environment days, which was part of.
If I could, is it possible just to show me? Like, I know there's a longer list of service levels than what's in this slide. Is it? Will I be able, before we come back, to get a document that shows, like, say, the 2018 or whatever years, maybe a couple of them, the service levels for your department compared to what you're proposing for this year?
Absolutely.
Great. That would be really helpful. And again, similar to something I was asking Mr. DiGeronimo, it's become something that many of us are quite concerned about, which is the attracting and retaining talent in professional disciplines. Are you experiencing any problems there?
My comments would be very similar to Lou's in terms of industry-wide challenges in some professions. In engineers, it's difficult to attract and retain. There's a high demand, as well as solid waste collection operators. The industry-wide, it's not just within the city, but when I talk to other municipalities and other for-profit companies, they're having a hard time attracting and retaining collection operators as well. So, we're all very much focused on industry-wide ways that we can have a good pipeline of individuals to take those roles. But again, those are the key areas that we are having some difficulty recruiting.
And does the budget you have in front of us have any proposals for those two groups of workers, hiring and retaining them?
Councillor, the budget has full funding. We have the staff complement that we need to do the job, and our wages in a number of those categories are through the collective agreement. So our strategy is training staff. We have a training program so we can take individuals who have a DZ or an AZ license and bring them into the city and ensure that we can train them up to do this job. And where there are individuals who have experience in other organizations on trucks, bringing them in as well. So we have enough funding for our program, but again, there are some challenges industry-wide on recruiting certain roles.
I'm not sure I followed that. So yes, I understand that there's an industry-wide problem with, professional services and collection staff. And yes, I understand that you've allocated budget to hire them if they're willing to be hired. I'm asking, is there anything that you're proposing that goes the step further to make sure that we can actually fill all of those positions?
So, Council, there's nothing specifically proposed. We have a number of operational tasks that we have now, like open houses, recruitment sessions for collection operators, and our training program. So those pieces are already in place to staff up.
Very good. Thank you. I'm almost at the end of my time. I'll let you go. Thank you.
Councillor, I think next we have Councillor Carroll.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Hi, Matt. I'm on the service level page, and right at the top, I noticed that beautification, the service levels are staying about the same, and yet timely pickup of or emptying, I should say, of waste containers in parks is one of our most constant complaints. And I don't know if that's unique to us, but I noticed that the service levels have stayed the same throughout. And I'm wondering how you measure them, because I know you have a map. These bins will be picked up once a week. These will be picked up every day because it's a banner park or whatever. But does anyone go back and figure out the satisfaction level with that from year to year and park to park?
So, Councillor, we have dedicated routes and staff, like you mentioned, and different service levels based on the parks. But a lot of it is customer driven. So when we do get the 311 calls that a bin is overflowed, we know that we've been there, and we will see perhaps why that area has had additional garbage over what our normal service levels would be. We've seen that during the pandemic with parks and some of our open spaces, and we've adjusted our operations with our existing complement to bring in those resources to pick up the materials. But the majority of those would be complaint driven. And when we see that there's a trend in that, then we augment our operations to hopefully reduce the amount of calls that we get into 311 on litter.
So is there enough flex built into that program? Because I would imagine it's sort of an unknown. A lot of people have sort of rediscovered their parks during the pandemic and may keep going there even as we come out of it. Is there enough flex on that line of your program that if we're finding demand just continues and continues in a park that previously was more quiet and it really needs more than once a week pickup, we can get it in year without disrupting too much of the budget metrics?
Absolutely, Councillor. So we have the operational flexibility to pick up at parks when required. The other piece I just want to highlight as well is part of the learning from COVID is there's of course more use in these parks, and we've made sure in this budget to ensure that those highly used parks can be serviced a little bit more frequently than they might have had been in the past on an as-needed basis to ensure that material is picked up.
Okay. I'm not going to ask a bunch of questions about the education and enforcement line. I usually do, but I'm asking for a briefing note to have it broken down because I don't have the analyst notes, so I don't know how much breakdown I'm going to get there. So I'm asking for a briefing note on that. So I won't use up my time there. The other thing I wanted to ask was similar to what I was asking Lou about inflation. I know that we're not there yet, so we're still for a number of years we're going to have to be using some outside service to get all of our organics processed. I think you said 50,000 tons are still having to be done by an outside party. Are we in sort of a flat rate based contract for those services outside of our own facilities, or are we going to get hit by inflation by some of our outside providers?
So, Councillor, the vast majority of our service contracts have an inflationary component to it, and within our 10-year financial projection, we've built in the risk around inflation to ensure that the rate will cover any inflationary increases that we anticipate. We work very closely with FPD on those projections. But again, inflation is one of those pieces that can come and go, but we've built in some flexibility and capacity within our 10-year projection to cover those costs, assuming that they are within the range that's currently being projected.
Okay. Excellent. I'm just going to say over the air, Mr. Chair, I just got a text from the Chair of Works. I haven't included that in my briefing note, but I will. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Carroll. Councillor Layton.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And I think Councillor Carroll's right on track with a really good opportunity for us to reevaluate some of the service levels, because we too are experiencing the same level of complaint. And this is nothing against Matt, your hard work in attaining the service levels you were given. It's about raising the bar for you, because we know that you don't mind jumping a little bit higher. for our constituents. Just on the last budget, we requested, or at least authorized, the city to undertake an exploration of expanding our RNG project to not only be production in the city of Toronto, but also further afield. Carlisle, I know, has been busy. I'm wondering if there's anything that you can say or report back from our direction the last time we had your budget at council.
So thanks for that, Councillor Layton. And we are currently working with a number of municipalities, just trying to get different information and seeing what type of models might work in terms of sharing our renewable natural gas strategy and different ways that we could help. There are lots of different operating type models that could be looked at in order to move that program forward from what the city has done and sharing that knowledge. And that would be something that we would, if it requires any financial requirements, we bring that back to council. But I think a lot of our push is sharing all the information that we've had and the good news stories of our sites coming online and really working with industry.
Matt, maybe the intent of my original motion was misleading. I didn't intend us to share anything. I wanted us to take a share of this segment of green tech. There's not many other people in the space in Ontario doing this at the scale that we are. We have the ability now to capture some of that share and capitalize it. And I can't believe I'm saying that. Like, you're getting that from a socialist here, that we should be trying to stake out more ground, given the knowledge we have and the fact that other smaller municipalities simply can't do the same. They can't mobilize the same way we can. I think that we should be far more aggressive, in my opinion, about how we use our knowledge and our advantageous position of size to corner part of this market, because we know it really, really well. I won't take that any further. Can you take us back? You said the organics processing is moving ahead faster than the expansion of the organics processing is moving ahead faster. I know that we've had this little dance over the years with people whispering in my ear about how fast we can go, and there being this back and forth. Can you just remind us what the delivery date used to be for the organics processing and what exactly it means to speed it up?
So thank you for that, Councillor. In this long-term solid waste management strategy, the third organics facility was estimated to come online late 2030. And I can get you the exact date in a follow-up, but we've accelerated that program by a decade. And we've been doing that not just from a growth perspective, that the city needs more material management, but also from a risk management perspective of we have two sites, and if one of them was to be shut down for any reason, it would be very difficult to find capacity for that. So we looked at it a couple of years ago, and we've moved it up 10 years in our capital program. It's fully funded in our capital program, and it's fully funded because of our 3% projected rate increase for the next for our planning horizon.
So just two more quick questions. One is, there's no more surprises on the bill for people. We've moved everything from the tax base to the rate base, correct? This is the first year, in my recollection. I think this is the first year that we're not having this kind of extra surprise for the medium bin or the small bin, correct? Or was that finished last year?
That was finished last year, Councillor.
Okay, good. Just finally, on the educational side, it's listed in the chart as an enhancement as for the expanded programs for the expanded community environment day programs. But I noticed like our capture rate for organics and blue bin is trending down. And what are the other educational components of our sort of strategy for attaining not a downward trend, because it's kind of in the opposite direction that we want to go? What other strategies do we have to increase that trend? Because I can't imagine, like, no offense to the staff that run environment days, I can't imagine that that's driving overall trends in green bin waste to be 2% less than last year.
Yeah, Councillor. So there's a couple items, and we can get into the blue bin piece of light weighting and that impacting the amount of tons. Moving from glass to plastic is definitely impacting the amount of materials that we get. But overall, what we've done in the division is we set up a community outreach and stakeholder engagement group that's focused on driving better reduction in materials, better allocation of those materials to the proper bins, working with condo units, working with numerous community groups and stakeholders to drive those numbers in the right direction. And so this budget, with the education and enforcement and communication budget, has a roadmap built into that to start developing a much more robust education program over and above the communications that we do. So we're really starting to implement that a little bit more stronger within the division to continue the work that everybody's doing to divert material.
And are there resources dedicated to that expansion in this budget?
Yes, sir, our councillor. Yeah.
Okay, I'll ask on the next occasion if you could just make those or be able to outline where they are. That'd be fantastic. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. So, Councillor, that information will be provided in the briefing note on education that Councillor Carroll requested. So we'll make sure to circulate that.
Just one other thing. There may have been a slide in Lou's presentation that I didn't notice, but this is the first slide I've seen with a climate lens of this year being a bit more robust than we have looked at in the last year. While we're still only looking at capital programs, particularly in the solid waste division, I just would like to acknowledge that that's a pretty positive step, and it outlines some of the good stuff that you're doing. So thank you, Matt.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other questions? Councillor Nunziata, and then McKelvey.
Yes, thank you. So going back to the question that Councillor Carroll asked about the parks, I agree. We're getting a lot more complaints about our parks. There are some areas where we have repeat requests because of the lack of litter bins in our parks. So is that an issue too in some of our parks that we've asked for litter bins and we're not putting them in because we don't want to encourage people to come and fill their garbage into these bins? Because that's what I was told in some of my parks where I've asked for additional bins because we do have a number of complaints that we won't put additional bins in because we would encourage. Is that true?
So partially, Councillor. So, if bins aren't strategically placed, they become a site for illegal dumping, which might have been an issue for one of the bins that you were advised about. But in terms of bins that, in the parks, in the playgrounds, in the areas that we service, if we need additional bins, we will deploy those bins, no problem. And what we can do is provide a list of those parks and open spaces that we service and the frequency that we service them, if that helps.
Yeah, because what I'm getting from staff is that they won't put additional bins in certain parks in my ward because, there's dumping and, so I guess then we're constantly going to get complaints and we have to send staff out there to clean, right? So, which is a challenge. Enforcement. Now, I know I brought it up last year, how some parts in my ward, and I'm sure other councillors' wards as well, where there's commercial and we have residential at the top where people continue just throwing their garbage out daily. How have we increased the enforcement in some of these areas where we're having constant issues, with complaints?
So the enforcement component of that is done through municipal licensing and standards, but solid waste does fund, I believe it's 13 or 14 officers to help us on those compliance issues. And I can, I know that it is a challenge. Councillor Crawford and I were out at a site last week where there were some issues, but we were there with MLS and public health and us, and we're coming up with a plan. So again, if it's site specific, we can work with our folks, our friends in MLS to address those issues and work with you to make sure that material is collected and enforced.
Well, the problem that I have is that I have gone through that process with MLS and I guess the whole issue is unless we find these individuals and these businesses that are causing the problem, which I don't think we have, then that will continue. Like it's a weekly issue, right? So we have to, I think it's important that we have a plan in place with you and with MLS that we actually give, be very aggressive and give fines to these landlords and, that we're having problems, because I have a huge issue in my ward. It's a daily issue. It's sort of,
Okay, so
constant complaints.
Through you, Mr. Budget Chair, it's Tracy, Councillor Nunziata. Happy to have a conversation with you offline. We do have to prove out the cases before we can charge people, but we'll get together with Carlton and chat about that. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, because this is like daily for me and weekly, same area, and we just can't seem to find and enforce it. It's because it's hard to identify who the individual is. Because you've got tenants at the top and you've got commercial, and it's a strip plaza and they're just throwing their garbage on the sidewalk, right?
That is part of the challenge. Yeah, we'll have a chat with you, Councillor Nunziata, see what we can do. Okay.
Thank you, Tracy.
No problem.
My last question is, I don't know if I missed the slide. I may have, because I stepped up for a minute, but the environment days. So this year, how successful was the environment days in the city?
So, Councillor, they were quite successful, and I think on average between 400 and 600 customers showed up each event. I can definitely get you the rundown of each of those sites and the materials that were collected and the number of residents that attended. No problem.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Councillor McKelvey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Councillor Carroll is going to add about park diversion. I just want to point out I was in Thompson Park and I saw the recycling bin being dumped directly into the garbage bin. So like if there is a contamination problem, maybe we need to kind of work on some more communications around that. My question is about the revenue generated by the renewable natural gas. And while you have the costs on that slide, the revenues or savings to the city also are presented. So what are those numbers?
So the cost of production is around $3 million, and council directed that the renewable natural gas be blended with our existing natural gas throughout the city. And so the divisions that use natural gas are funding the purchase of renewable natural gas, which then makes its way back into solid waste at a net zero cost for us, but a greening impact on the natural gas that's being used across the city.
So do your budget numbers, I think they're on slide 10, reflect that revenue as well? Like, is that so those are already reflected in those numbers?
Yes, they are.
And then on that slide, you're checking boxes against reduces greenhouse gas emissions and against improves climate resiliency. So I'm just wondering, like, what was the definition of resilience that you were using? Because is it energy sustainability, or like what is it looking at? Because in some cases it's clear, but it's not so much in others. So like, what was the broad definition you used as for resilience in this categorization?
So resilience in this impact or in this definition was just broad ability to impact the overall climate. And so when we're looking at resilience, there's a lot of different definitions on being able to bounce back or being able to plan ahead. And we've made sure to incorporate that type of resiliency in our definition here. So when we're looking at the third organics facility, we're looking at resiliency from not using the natural gas and instead using renewables. And when we're looking at resiliency from the Duff and Organics Waste Management Facility, we're looking at net zero, right? And if EED's online, they could probably give you the more exact definition of what resiliency means for them. But for solid waste, it's a broad perspective of not only planning for the now, but planning for the future and being able to adapt.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next. Seeing none, I just have a quick question. Matt, the calendars. that we ended last year. I guess this coming year, we may be getting, and Councilor Nunzi is shaking her head, agreeing. Can you just talk about what you'll be doing to inform community members and residents that we will probably start getting some phone calls when they don't see the calendar coming in, and how you're going to mitigate that?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. So we've been sending out within the utility waste bill a schedule of when your collection will be. So it's embedded within your bill. And we are going to be, by the end of the year, also providing a communications booklet that has a lot of the same material that would have been in the calendar, but more condensed, again, from a fiscally sustainable, environmentally sustainable approach. We've engaged the councillors' offices, and we have social media on this. The websites have been updated, and we're really pushing the message out that there is a change in this program. But again, when we look at the ability to determine when your collection day is, we have online services, and we also have the schedule that's being produced for every customer.
Okay, thank you. Okay, seeing no other questions, thank you very much, Matt. Appreciate the work you're doing. Team, of course. Last, we'll have the Toronto Parking Authority presentation.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, councillors. Delighted to be here today. Ask the clerks to do the full screen, and we can jump into it.
Welcome, Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first event so be gentle as best you can. So the Toronto Parking Authority. Our purpose here today is, clearly to outline our 2022 financial plans, but as importantly, and particularly in light of the fact that this is my first opportunity to get in front of this group, is to share with you our approach, quite frankly, 22 and beyond, to become a bigger, better, faster organization. We believe we have a lot of opportunity to do just that, and want to at least share with you our emerging thinking in terms of how we're going to accelerate the performance of the organization. Before I get into the specifics, I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to thank the tremendous people who work at the Toronto Parking Authority. We have enormous amount of the staff who've been here for decades, and as we all know, this has been unprecedented times in terms of difficulty, particularly within the transportation mobility sector. The industry was particularly crushed, not dissimilar from the hospitality business. And despite those challenges, they showed up every day. They're out in the field, working with their reduced customer profile, looking after facilities. And for that, I'm grateful. And on behalf of our board, I wanted to thank them publicly today. If we can go to the next page, please. Just a couple of fast facts, if you will. So first of all, and some 9 months into the job now, I'll share with you, this is a great business, huge opportunities, and some really cool work being done. And as I said really in the opening context, we can do so much more on behalf of the city. Certainly we're a small organization, fully staffed. When we're fully staffed, about 270 or so full-time equivalents before we include students. But we do have a big impact on the city, and remind everybody that we've delivered $1.4 billion back to the city since the year 2000. So not too bad at all in terms of deliverables. As another data point, we're a big operation in the parking/mobility world. Pre-COVID, 34 million customer transactions a year. We're also, and something I'm particularly excited about and learning about and engaged on, is we have an outstanding bike share platform across the city of Toronto. It's third largest in North America, and while it'd be kind of fun to be called the biggest, but we certainly aspire to be the best, not only in the context of North America, but across the city. So we're just getting started on that. Record year in bike share, and with huge opportunities as we develop our platform to all the wards across the city in the coming year. So quite excited about that. And we've also invested in incremental resources from a staffing standpoint to make sure the bike share program is doing what it needs to do today and to leverage this opportunity. If we can go to the next page, please. So as we think about exiting the pandemic, a couple of the speakers already referenced, hopefully it's in our rear view window. The opportunity for us today and the TPA is, quite frankly, in a really pedantic standpoint, how do we deliver another $1 billion to the city at a minimum over the next 20 years while providing world-class mobility solutions? And I use the word very deliberately, mobility solutions, because it's fundamentally about moving people through the city more sustainably, easier, and with good value, et cetera. And, as I think about how we take that mindset and convert it into action, how do we as an organization keep focused in a very deliberate fashion as we go forward? We can't get distracted. And perhaps in the past, that's what's, put us in difficult ways. As I tell my staff, I share with the board, is we can achieve anything at the TPA, just not anything, just not everything. And so we're going to be really focused, and what you're going to see today and what you're going to see in the coming months and the coming years, an organization that's going to work very hard to be very deliberative and very focused on focusing on the fundamentals, and that's to become a great world-class operator. So we can go to the next page. I won't drain all the commentary on this, but essentially the point is, going forward, we have a singular purpose. And, it's a bit of a cliche, but we aspire to be the world's premier, or the world's best, if you prefer provider of sustainable parking, bike share, and integrated mobility solutions, for our customers, for our partners across the city, and for the city at large. And it's interesting when you start to have the conversation with my city stakeholders, my staff, certainly our vendors. People get excited about that, but they get a little bit nervous. They go, really? The best in the world? There's some pretty good operators out there worldwide. And I remind them that while that may be aspirational, if we can align the organization up culturally about chasing that notion of perfection or the best, if we do that, we might just catch excellence from an executional standpoint every day. And I'll take that every single day. And that's what we're committed to do on behalf of the city. And the last thing, and I've got this feedback from a lot of the councillors and the city stakeholders, is we have an opportunity to show up differently as well, which is why our approach going forward is very much one vision, one team, one city. We are part of the City of Toronto. We have to earn the trust and the right to work in an integrated fashion with all our stakeholders to make mobility solutions work for all of the city at all of the time. I had a lot of conversation with Transportation Group and Creatio, Toronto Hydro, et cetera, and others, and how we best do that. So we're making everybody win as we go through that. Next page, please. This is the snapshot. This is the simplified P&L for 2022. Just very quickly on 2021, by any measure, this has been the most difficult year in the 70-year history of the Toronto Parking Authority, currently forecasting to actually lose money for the first time in the history of the organization. We're encouraged that the last 4 months of the year, revenue is coming back at an accelerated rate. So we're hopefully we can minimize that number a little bit. But again, setting all that aside, it's tough economic conditions, particularly in this sector. But that being said, and this is where the optimism comes out, and this is what's rallying the organization around, is we do believe with 100% conviction that we're going to have a much better year in 2022. We're going to deliver a profit of $14.4 million on revenues of $120 million. And that represents, for a data point, that's about a 72 index versus pre-pandemic 219 levels. So not all the way back to pre-pandemic levels. We clearly have, a very different dynamic in terms of how people are showing up and working. So that is impacting our business. But as you think about parking, specifically performing much better than aviation, which, I do have some experience with aviation, with public transit, whether it be in the TTC or Metrolinx, where we're farther out of the depths of the recession, the COVID recession, but certainly not all the way back. But the good news is, because we have a high fixed base, as we get closer to pre-pandemic levels, our P&L and our profit levels flow faster to the bottom line. So we're very encouraged about that. Next page, please. Very quickly, these are really 2 pages. I'll just synthesize it in the spirit of time. During the pandemic, and this is important context for 20 and 21, our primary focus, because we're a commercially oriented organization, is fundamentally to protect the business. When you have traffic and revenue declines of 90% in the first 3 months of the pandemic, et cetera, our focus was on cash preservation. And for example, over the last 2 years, we've reduced OPEX by about $13 million versus the plans during the individual years, and $44 million in deferment of capital. Now, there's some downsides associated with that, particularly on the capital, but the team took very much a deliberate approach and not to do anything that would put us behind the 8 ball, if you will, in terms of catching up post-pandemic. But again, the purpose was to protect the business going forward. And as we exit pandemic, we'll be able to accelerate our performance in terms of investing back in the business to accelerate revenue and improving customer service and all those good things we want on behalf of the city. As it relates to 2021, as we exit the year currently, I'm particularly pleased right now, the fact that we do now have crystal clarity from a strategic standpoint in terms of what success looks like, not only with the staff, but with the board and with many of our city stakeholders. The great news is we've got all our people back to work. All our people were back to work by the end of August of this year, and that's great. We've invested a lot of time, and a credit to my leadership team to investing more time, quality time with our city stakeholders to make sure that they know that we are open for business and we want to partner and provide solutions for everybody. So the collaboration levels have got much better. We don't want to take this tribal view by any stretch of the imagination. Where I'm really excited about this whole electrification opportunity in terms of sustainability and climate agenda. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but the TPA can be a great catalyst to, quite frankly, transform the EV charging opportunity for the city. And not only provide the EV charging for the customers, the TPA, but to look at more strategically across the city and support the residents writ large. And this body of work has started working in partnership with a lot of the different divisions, et cetera, across the city. But we're going to build a lot of the momentum in 2021, balance of this year, and start actually delivering real-time outcomes in terms of getting the chargers at a starting point in terms of our infrastructure over the next couple of years. And we'll certainly focus on what we can control, but again, looking to develop it even more broadly across our specific inventory. And of course, last but not least, BikeShare. Really pleased with the performance of BikeShare this year. A lot of people were thinking that we got the bump in 2020 because of COVID, people being at home and not having an opportunity to do anything. But even with the opening up of the city, we've had great performance this year. Last year was a record year. We delivered a record year performance by the third week of October. So it's all gravy balance of year. We're driving more people through our fixed costs. We're narrowing that gap in terms of the subsidy levels and operating standpoint. So very encouraged about BikeShare. We have more professional people focused on building that and working in conjunction with Active TO. Forgive me, I can't keep track of all the acronyms, but very aggressive in terms of providing BikeShare and driving distribution of our platform across the city, and starting to invest now in EV bikes, electric bikes, and providing the electrification for those across the city as we look at moving out into the farther reaches of the city, so it's more user-friendly, more equitable for users across the patch. Go to the next page, please. Actually, go to the key risks and challenges. Next page. A key risk and challenges always frightens people. This is something I'm very passionate about. This is about enterprise risk. So through the lens of any organization will do this, but ours in particular, who are responsible for delivering a P&L for the organization, we have to be really focused, including our board, in terms of developing very specific risk statements and how that informs our strategic platforms for the business. I am, Mr. Councillor Layton's on the call today. Our board's very close to standing up an audit and a risk committee for 2022. I think that's great news. It's going to allow us to be more strategic, more thoughtful, and think about the business in terms of what the opportunities and the threats and how we address them. So very excited about that. I'm not going to drain the page. You can read it, and it's really reflected in all candor in terms of the priorities for next year. But it's something you're going to see more of from us. It's something I'll be reporting back to you. You'll see it again next year at this time, because I expect this list to get larger, not because we have problems, because we have more opportunities and the associated risks with them. So, for example, ESG should become a center point, quite frankly, or one of the foundational risk elements we'll talk about as we go forward. There should be more on customers, et cetera. So we'll do that, and it's a commitment I can make to you and your colleagues across the city. So we're looking forward to that, notwithstanding it's more work for my CFO, et cetera. So, but it's the right thing to do. If we can go to the next page, this is where the rubber hits the road. And I apologize, many of you have heard this already through me, whether through our public board meetings or with individual conversations. We have now a strategic platform that's going to drive our decision-making and investments over the next number of years. We'll clearly partner with the board and council in terms of how these get massaged over time. But we've got 5 priorities, and I want to make sure my organization understands with clarity, these are what are going to make it successful. The strategic platforms won't change. Some of the tactics will as we execute them throughout the course of the year. Number 1 is build a great place to work. I'm struck by the fact that my previous colleagues talked about people. This is all about people. If we don't get this right at the TPA, the other 4 or 5 items won't matter, quite frankly. Our particular focus from a priority standpoint is safety, talent, a lot of discussion about talent, engagement, and then of course, D&I, diversity and inclusion, and bringing that to life, and not just talking about it, but to drive outcomes. Number 2, strengthening the core, execute with excellence. And if you think about us, certainly in 2022, it is about people and executing with excellence everything we do. Last 2 years have been difficult on the staff, so we need to come together and start focusing on the fundamentals. And from an operational standpoint, as an operating company, we need to be really focused on our asset management. A lot of discussion about asset management, a lot of discussion about capital productivity. That always hasn't been our tower and strength. We got to get a lot better at that. The whole notion of security, investing in our infrastructure to provide incremental safety and security, not only for our customers, but also for our staff, state of good repair, and wayfinding. Wayfinding is next to godliness. Understand clarity in terms of how you're navigating your solutions through our infrastructure. Number 3, accelerating growth and financial sustainability, This is table stakes. So priority number 1 is to deliver the P&L. We need to make $14 million net income so we can provide a much better dividend to the city of Toronto. That's absolutely expectation. We are going to transform the EV penetration across the city of Toronto. Other people are going to help us on that journey, but we can be the catalyst for real change, and we're extremely excited about that. And of course, we talked about the opportunity with bike share as we go forward. But connecting with our customers, we can't forget who actually pays the bill as we go forward. We're going to develop a new customer experience strategy based on technology, the power in our mobile phone. This is how we engage. Think about it. We have 34 million transactions, and if we can start talking to those people in real time and provide them with an opportunity to transit through the city through technology and simplify their lives. So it's just not about parking, but it's about parking and subways and buses and streetcars and bikes and all the other last mile mobility solutions that we verge over the coming years. Where to find my charging station? When can I do it overnight? And it's not only about consumers as we go forward, but it's also our B2B opportunity. We haven't spent a lot of time on this business in terms of engaging. You think about the supply chain and the courier companies and the TNCs and the car share, how we're engaging them. We need to start engaging them and leverage our inventory to build greater support for them and, quite frankly, get more traffic off the roads into our inventory on a sustained basis and monetize it while we do that. And then lastly, this is actually a fascinating body. We're very complex and engage and innovate with our strategic partners, both the city and with our big vendors. We have world-class vendors, Precise, Passport, PBSC in terms of managing our business, et cetera. We need to leverage their intellectual capital to help us transform this business. From a city standpoint, this is very interesting. We got this incredibly complicated but ecosystem in terms of transportation, parking, etc. I can tell you it's been a delight meeting many of the leaders on this. And there's a big body of work in terms of leveraging their insights and the work they do to help us develop a new relationship framework with the TPA and how that manifests itself in the new parking strategy writ large for the city, which Barbara Gray is running. I think it's coming back to council, at least in stages in 2022. Which completion in 2023. Don't quote me on that. I'll get in trouble from Barbara. But a lot of huge work. And I share this with you as much as we look at it in a totality of an ecosystem. It has to, and if, our view is that if we're a part of the solution that's going to be more effective for the city, if we kind of just sit in the corner and worry about legacy cars, etc., it's not going to be effective. So stay tuned on that one. But you'll have our commitment, my commitment, that we'll get a lot better in terms of providing solutions that council requires for the long term. Next page, please. Getting into the budget specifically. 22 operating budget to summarize. Next page. Thank you. The highlights real quick. Don't want to drain the page. Revenue growth of $38 million in 2022, 46%. And again, it's 72 index versus 2019. Now remind everybody, is that conservative? Is it too aggressive? We believe it is a center cut approach to how consumers are going to show up in 2022. We do not have a crystal ball in terms of the return to work. It's very inconsistent. But over the last 12 weeks, business has been consistently running between 68 and 72% of pre-pandemic levels. So we think we're very comfortable with that. The good thing with our economic model with the city, if we are too conservative and the number is greater, that money is going to flow back to the city anyway. So we're thrilled about that. And we don't believe we have a lot of risk. And if we do have a risk on the top line, we will continue to flex our costs as we've always done. From a controllable cost standpoint in 2022, we are investing more money than we had in the last couple of years. But it's really catching up in many respects over the last couple of years. We have a full staffing model in place for 2022. That reflects about 50%, 43% specifically of the cost. Reinvesting in maintenance is going to be more use of our facilities as we go forward. Cyber security and technology support is consuming 8% of that incremental spend. Direct costs for our payment processes, more people using our equipment, so the costs associated with leveraging our technology, and that accounts for the majority of the spend, and headcount remains flat. And most importantly, from a city standpoint, certainly for city finances, net profit of a minimum of $14.4 million, and we'll commit to delivering that in 2022. If we can go to the next page, please. How the budget is funded. Good news, it's sourced in 2022 from the 22 million customer transactions we have next year and the 3.4 million bike share riders. We're self-funding. We do not recommend a rate increase to support city businesses writ large. We believe we have a P&L now that is sustainable and can support growth. And the one thing we do have an opportunity at as we go forward is particularly on bike share, but I believe in Green P and even the EV charging strategy we go forward is how do we leverage external partners to help support this, build the profile of the bike share portfolio, the Green P portfolio, and provide support, not only from a sponsorship standpoint, that's always important, but also from, again, an intellectual capital, marketing capacity, and the technological, how do we leverage their technology to make our systems work faster, better, and more customer friendly. So you get a big focus from Jeff D, my Vice President of Business Development, and Phil Sathos, his Director, in terms of bringing that life to well. So, over the next number of years, I'd like to see the share of money from that side of our business improve materially. If we can go to the next page, please. One more. Super. This page, so just our net book value assets for the TPA at the end of 2020, as certified by our auditors, is $220 million. On the next page, this is where the rubber hits the road. So what is our capital spend? So we're forecasting, we're not forecasting. Our plan is to deliver $35 million in capital in 2022. That will, you can see the splits on the page. State of good repairs about 21%, but the key investments are St. Lawrence Market North will come online hopefully in the back half of next year. It's targeted roughly right now about September, October. But bike share will attract a lot of, over 2 million incremental capital. EV at minimum of $1 million, and that's without the matching funding from the federal government, and that will grow substantially in the next 3 years. Wayfinding, I alluded to that, $1.5 million. Pay and display, security, and state of good repair. So that's about 90% of the spend. So again, we're taking our capital and we're focusing on the key enablers of our strategic platform as we go forward. And this is fully funded from our reserves, cash reserves. Next page, please. Over the next 10 years, we're forecasting to spend $201 million. You can see the splits between service growth and enhancements, roughly half. State of good repair is not dissimilar, and health and safety is a lesser degree. I think over time, I've worked in capital markets for a long time. This next 5 years, we're going to see some pushing and shoving. Then there's a huge opportunity to accelerate our investments in, let's call it, the more climate-friendly initiatives. So, for example, charging, bike share expansion. I alluded to ESG opportunities, stormwater management, etc. We're doing a lot of work now from an asset management standpoint to understand exactly how we're going to attack this state of good repair, a challenge for us in the coming years. So we're very comfortable, and we can fund this completely based on our revenues and profitability. But I think there's going to have to be some more precision and more focus as we go forward. But that's not unusual when you're developing a capital program. Next page. Oh, and just so there we go. That's a good one. As you might expect, we fund most of our capital. Historically, we haven't relied a ton on funding. We have got historically, however, funding for bike share for different levels of government, both provincial and federal. We are working, and thanks to Councillor Layton and Toronto Atmospheric Fund, we've been engaged with the federal government in terms of incremental funding for our EV charging infrastructure. We remain cautiously optimistic that will come to fruition. And the good news is there's a lot of enthusiasm for the opportunity in Canada's largest city in terms of going faster in this regard. So we're going to make sure that the city is well represented when we're playing in this space. And with that, I thank you. Thank you for indulging me, and we'll turn it back to the chair. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Scott. I appreciate that. Let's go to questions. Councillor Perks is not there, so we'll start with the committee members. Councillor Layton.
Look, I was just going to say thanks to Scott for the presentation today. I'm normally one of the people that grills staff. I don't have anything to grill you on today, although I think at the next meeting in council there will be some questions as to why we're not increasing the revenue potential of our parking revenue. Would just say great growth in the bike share program. I guess maybe one question would be, what do you think is driving that growth, and how fast can we roll out more electric bikes, because they seem to be in hugely high demand in our system. I haven't even been able to find one yet, and I ride a bike share at least once a week. The second is how passionately you spoke about what role the TPA could play in the EV rollout. I think I made a speech at the TPA months ago when I first became a board member, and I guess I felt like I was maybe on a different planet. You just I think repeated some of my own lines back, and I love it, and I love how serious you're taking that, because there is huge potential for us here to not only advance EVs, but to be a huge beneficiary of the rollout as we become the charger of choice for the people as they transition towards EV. So I guess the question is more around the bike share. What do you attribute the growth to, and where and how fast can we move on expanding our pedal assist bikes?
Great question. The growth in bike share this year, most of it's attributed to people actually signing up to be members. So it's not the casual riders, which drove a lot of the performance last year. People weren't going to work, so they said, well, I'll try bike share. This year, people are getting more passionate about actually joining the bike share program. The fact that we provided a 45-minute, not just a classic 30-minute option as well, has made it stickier. So I think we have, I know we have more loyal customers. So the more we build that membership, I think we have a more sustainable bike share business across the city. So we're very encouraged about that. And you're going to hear from Justin, the group will hear from Justin over the coming months about how that manifests itself in terms of splits. But we have a very good penetration on people who actually join the program. In terms of electrification bikes, they're about 3 or 4 times more expensive than legacy bikes or more traditional bikes. Any big bike share, successful bike share across the world, principally Europe, some parts of the US, EV is the way to go on bikes. We're actually doing a capital acquisition on electric bikes balance of year just to leverage the opportunity, but it will become a larger and larger percentage of our fleet over the next 3 or 4 years. We have an aspiration by 2025 to have about 10,000 bikes in inventory. We have about 6,800 today. We've got currently 300, I think it's about 300, 350 electric bikes in the market, in our inventory presently. That number should be over 1,000 over the next 3 or 4 years. So a big focus of effort. We have some infrastructure issues to address in order to electrify them. We'll probably end up, rather than using a traditional plug in, we'll probably go to a battery model, which is more efficient. Everybody can see it in terms of lawnmowers, etc. So we'll likely use a battery and switch out batteries from the team. But I think you've captured the opportunity that needs to be one as we go forward, and will be.
Scott, can I just add? There's a model out there for some of the roaming bikes around. They call them juicers, where members can actually take the bikes and refill them themselves and be compensated either through time of membership or something. I don't know if that's something that we've gone to, rather than having exposed batteries that can pop in and out. To be honest, you might be able to figure out a better way with those batteries, but I know that one of the other models is you let people take them home, they juice them up, and then put them back in the fleet. They call them juicers. I know it's strange, Jennifer.
We'll take that. I'm sure the staff knows. Yeah, it's new to me, but we'll follow up. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor McKelvey.
Chair, so the EV chargers are kind of peppered in and out as opposed to kind of all in one spot. So I was just kind of hoping you could summarize. So how many you have right now, how many you planning to put in? And then it's not quite clear, there is talk of some federal money that's included on that, but is that secured or not secured?
Okay, so currently our inventory against the Toronto Parking Authority today, as we speak, is 9. I think you and I had that conversation about that a few months ago. So only 9 across the world's largest parking authority. We have secured or just about to finalize a pilot with Toronto Hydro. They've been very patient with us to deploy an incremental 32 in the first half of next year. And we're also planning in terms of our own program to deploy another 30 or 40 next year, level 2 chargers, with a focus on our garages where we have the electrical capacity in place currently. We currently have a proposal in with Enercan. We're hoping to hear from them back in the first week of December, and where we would secure funding from them shared with us for approximately 430 level 2 chargers. The expectation is we would deploy those starting in probably in 23 and 24. So all things considered today, by 2024 we'll have approximately 500 in the marketplace across our properties. The majority of those will be in our garages, and some of them tactically in our lots. But in parallel with this, phase 2, which we're starting in the back half of next year, it will be a more robust program, and that will be looking at a combination of our properties, our lots specifically, but also working with transportation and environment in terms of what are the opportunities on street charging, which is a lot more complicated. And this tranche we're targeting directionally between 500 and 1,000 units, and it will include not only level 2, but also direct charging fast chargers, which are critically important in short duration parking. So whether it be on a street or on a parking lot where people got to get in and get out and take advantage of that. So if we can execute that over the course of the next 3 or 4 years, the TPA in itself should be able to put in the marketplace directionally around 1,000 to 1,500 by 2026 to 27. If we can go faster, we will. This is a skill set we don't have in house. Truthfully, we're bringing this on right now. Of course, there's a lot of industry experts who've done this across North America, so we'll make sure we leverage them to make sure we're doing it the right charger at the right place at the right time. And as you might expect, there's also a lot of interest in the private sector in partnering with us in terms of what that might look like. And that could be automotive companies, TSC, car rental organization, et cetera. So again, our strategy here is to act as a nexus, create this ecosystem around the table to help us bring this to fruition, because that's the one advantage we have over our private sector competitors, because we can bring a lot of people together quickly. And your last question is, how confident are we are success? We're cautiously optimistic, but we're going to go forward regardless, and we have the capital wherewithal to go forward with funding or not. But obviously, it would allow us to be effective in partnership with federal government.
So and I appreciate you might not have the number to this, but when you put in a charging station and then you're going to get revenue off that, how long does it take to break free on that cost?
To do the P&L by location is the work we're going to be doing over the balance of this year and early next year, because it depends on the kind of charger you're using, the location, the utilization rates, et cetera. We could put, the industry, the providers of the industry can show you a lot of P&Ls, but until you actually decide where it's going to be based on demand expectations, it's difficult to say. The advantage we have is, I would say if we're looking at strictly for a cost recovery model on fast chargers and level 2s, we could probably get to a break-even point over 3 to 5 years. However, the advantage we have as TPA, we will have an opportunity to integrate this with our parking platform. So not only we can integrate not only the electricity charge, but also the advantage of charging for parking. And the other thing we can do that other providers haven't done is it's been solely looked through the individual driver of a car, a B2C model. We think a huge opportunity for us is to do a B2B model. So how we would partner with different private sector fleet operators to provide support for them. And again, not only from a charging standpoint, for parking, because again, you think of the congestion in the city and people driving around and taking up space. If we can get them, leverage our assets and get people to start going to specific destinations, let's call it EV charging hubs, convert some of our lots to, let's call it a parking hub to a charging hub, get people off the roads and they can deploy it in real time. That's the aspiration we're having, which is why in the presentation, we're talking about this notion next year of establishing a couple of prototypical.
Right. So I'm realizing time. So, and I'm just going to squeeze in something very, very short. So really the next few years, they're still very much piloting this, and you'll get better refinement on that kind of information, including like those sorts of costs and paybacks over time.
Yes, Councillor.
Okay.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Nunziata.
Just a couple questions. I'm very pleased to say that we finally put in bike share in my ward. But my question is, do you have a breakdown of the various locations, where the usage is and the revenue generated? Because I would be curious to find out if it is successful in the ones that you've just put in my ward in particular.
I don't know that off the top of my head, but we can certainly get that for you.
Okay. My next question is, are we having any discussions with Metrolinx at all, with some of the stations that will be opened hopefully next year, with the Go and the Up? And I have a few in my ward, but are we having any discussions with Metrolinx on possibly in these locations that we can partner with Metrolinx as far as the share?
The shorter answer is yes. I have not specifically talked to my friends at Metrolinx since I gave them this role, but it is a priority of ours. And I know some of my staff who's listening in, that's on our agenda for the back half of this year and early next year to talk about that, not only across their various go-to-market solutions across the city, but also some of their parking facilities across the, across the GTA writ large, the Lakeshore West, Lakeshore East line. So there's all sorts of opportunities to work with them going forward, not only bike share, but also electrification as well.
Okay, so you are having that discussion with Metrolinx. Okay. Now your proposal is to freeze the parking rates, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, Councilor.
Is that citywide?
Yes, correct.
Citywide? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Seeing no questions, thank you very much, Scott. I appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, I did email in that I had questions for TPA.
I'm sorry, I do apologize. Okay, Councillor Carroll, over to you.
Thankfully, not too many, because some have been asked. Ordinarily, I'd be asking, why are you freezing the rates? But I appreciate that that's the proposal, because we really don't know. We don't know where the cost of a restaurant meal is even going at this point, with the cost of butter going up by 20% the next couple of days. So it does make sense as you proposed. But I want to ask a question, especially now that you're working on this EV program. I'm even more interested now in how you might expand the joint venture program. I'm frustrated where I represent, north of the 401. We still have lots of density going in, lots of condos. And along the Shepherd subway, what we're finding is that a lot of those units end up being either rented or owned by folks without cars. But there's a tremendous need for. I have a couple where the condo board actually wants to adjust their resident parking lot and make it so that the visitor parking is more extensive, and they don't have any fee structure in place, and they'd like to have one so that they can be assured those who have spots are using them, and the visitor parking is maxed out for the retail upstairs, and visitors coming to visit or pick up carless residents. But we have no TPA joint ventures up there, and I know that your favorite projects are ones where you had an investment in the land or the property itself. But is there any marketing plan now or in the future to start to go more aggressively forward as a competitive manager of that additional parking along major transit routes? The new provincial major transit station areas provide us with a whole lot of different planning and zoning opportunities. Is TPA a part of that equation?
That is an outstanding question. And I'm not saying that just to.
Well, thank you. Do I get a gold star, Mr. Chair?
I'm not, and forgive me, I'm not trying to pander, because I don't want to telegraph our strategy, but the TPA historically, for good reasons, we are very much focused, I'm going to call it government/institutional businesses. But as our mandates change, we're more focused on operational. We can play more thoughtfully and more deliberately in a wider space. And we believe we have huge opportunity to develop our business beyond where we've played in the past. So as you say, to engage with, let's call it third-party partners, management contracts with perhaps untraditional business partners for us, and leverage the power of our Green P app, which is extraordinary, 1.1 million members, and leverage our technology and our portfolio to satisfy the desires that you've described in your part of the ward. So that is certainly something that Mr. D and Mr. Safos have been charged with. And we can talk more about that going forward. Even throughout the course of this year, through our board presentations and requests, the team has signed up a number of parking management agreements. Our job over the next 5 years is to make that a bigger part of our portfolio, which quite frankly will future-proof the business and allow us to, again, deliver more value back to the city.
So they're already sort of working on this. It seems that I'd be happy to, although I don't sit on the TPA board as one of the council members, I'd be happy to discuss this, because I think it's, if we see its potential early on, then it actually changes the planning and approval conversation for us. If we know that potential is there, we can be more demanding about upping the visitor parking ratio in some places to make sure that the parking does end up underground where we want it, and the right people are using that lot. Because if you're there, you're a good partner to a condo board or a property management company. But if you're there, you don't have residents sort of lazily parking on the street around their buildings, because it's in display around there, and the visitor parking is at reasonable rates, which is what TPA offers. It makes them really go down and use the unit they already own. But it also really helps the neighborhood attract, yes, we do have parking here, so come and use the retail grade that we demanded be put in this suburban condo. It's a real challenge up there to make sure that those retail outlets are a success. I think you're a big part of the equation. So I'd be happy to talk with anyone from TPA about this going forward, because I think what we could learn about Shepherd Avenue can really be used along the Eglinton Crosstown route as well.
Outstanding. We'll reach out to your staff to get some time with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Scott, for coming out today and all the work you're doing, of course. Appreciate your presentation today. So members, that was it for presentations. We'll go quickly to speakers if there are any. I think Councillor Carroll, you were wanting to speak, so I'll recognize you first.
Thank you. Yes, just to move the briefing notes. I don't know if those can be put on the screen. If not, I can. I have them. Matthew emailed.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. Yeah,
oh, okay.
we will display those in just 1 second. There we go.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Yes, these are the briefing notes, and these are both in the solid waste budget. I need more time on the Toronto water budget, and would really like to see the analyst notes. I would love to see them before Friday, in fact, but I digress. The solid waste management work. What I'm asking for is a briefing note on the work plan for education, and also how service levels for enforcement are being distributed across the districts, and whether or not these levels are actually meeting requests for enforcement. I'm asking for that one because I'm worried that we're maintaining the same service levels there and not really breaking it down, and yet that's a very frequent call for many of us. And on the work plan for education, it's really time to start looking at this. We're heading into the action-oriented parts of the long-term waste strategy, and what we're doing in education, I think, really matters. Especially, we used to just sort of passively do most of that education through the solid waste calendar. For moving on to other things, I think we should really know what's happening, what we're paying for, because we're going back up to the funding levels that we wanted now that we're post-pandemic. But are we really getting bang for our buck? I think we should look at that as we're adopting it. So I really want to look at it during budget time, as opposed to waiting for when you might otherwise present it and works. And the second one is the city beautification program, which is primarily in the parks program. The chair of works, Councillor McKelvey, texted me while we were questioning and discussing this, and I share her concerns. Are we putting the containers in the right place? We now place a black bin and a blue bin, but are we getting the diversion rates we want? Is that part of why we feel like we don't have the right service levels in terms of getting waste out of parks? Should that be part of the education program, talking to people about what you do with diversion and waste in parks? I think we've got to really look at this one and look at what the measures are to decide, and to decide whether or not we want to tackle the very complex issues of enforcement of how people deal with waste in parks. I really don't think we can set the service levels unless we do a really deep dive here. And again, as much as we could say, could Works please look at that over the long term? good to have it right now at budget time as we're looking at as we're adopting those service levels. Mr. Speaker, I'll just say this on the other two budgets. I asked my question about TPA because of the, just having poured over the inclusionary zoning report and looking at, along all these major transit areas. Shepherd Subway is not included in it largely because it already has realized a ton of density. It would be kind of hard for it to absorb more if it was made one of the I forget the PMTSAs in IZ, and so they're being put in at a later date. But we struggle constantly with how do you manage parking, and yet we have the greatest parking tool in North America in the TPA. And so I think we really have to start to look at whether or not we need to add to their business model and really signal for them through council and through our discussions here that if the board wants to go boldly into that area, that we would be interested in that. I think it's really important to telegraph that back to this arm's length board of directors. And that's why I asked that question. I'm not moving a briefing note because I got great answers that he does in fact have a couple of senior team members looking at this. And I'm confident that those discussions will happen. But we hung on to our parking authority when cities all across North America were offloading parking, contracting it out or selling it off, and all of them regret it because they look at the Toronto Parking Authority. And here we are now looking at it has an even greater potential environmentally in terms of providing charging infrastructure and really in terms of helping us address growth and the change in the number of people who choose to own cars or those that want to car share and just say to people, come visit me, come to my place because I don't have a car. I'm happy to entertain. We're seeing that happen more and more in suburban dense development. And so I think it's a new place that TPA should be a partner. And then we'll see more revenue than they're already giving us when in non-pandemic times. Those are my comments, and I hope members can support the briefing notes because it sounds like they answered some of the questions that others were asking. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor. Anybody else want to speak? Councillor Kelly?
Chair, I have a request for a briefing note. I can pull up just that the General Manager, Toronto Water, and General Manager, Solid Waste provide a briefing note to the November 19th Budget Committee on the water and compost supports provided to Toronto's community gardens and Toronto's urban farms operated as nonprofits, including but not limited to the Melbourne urban farms. So I'm just wondering, really what is the policy around these things? I have been delivering compost to our community gardens through my office budget. I'm happy to do that, but it's not sustainable. I think certainly the use of our compost to grow food is a good use of that. So I'm just seeking some clarity around what all those policies are related to that.
Thank you. Anybody else? Thank you. I do have, I'll speak last. I'm going to do two notices of our briefing note request for Councillor Perks. I think you put in for service votes. I just want to put those up if we could.
Mr. Chair, just one sec. We'll display your motion 3A and 3B.
Thank you. No, it's on behalf of Councillor Perks. So first of all, I just want to thank all three divisions for coming up and the incredible work that you do. A lot of times when we're looking at our rate supported programs, it sometimes tends to go fairly quickly through the process before we begin the operating budget. But when you look at the size and the services that they provide to residents across the city, and we've seen today how incredibly important they are, and just with water and with solid waste, and the kind of capital program and work that they do is incredible. So I just want to again thank them on that and recognizing the challenges we've had over the last year and a half. That they're continuing to keep the costs low for our residents and businesses. That's important, but at the same time, continuing to do the investments that we need. So I just want to thank them on the work that they're doing on the proposed budget so far, and we'll chat again on the 19th. And I think you've got both of those up there, Matthew. That's great. Okay, I think we're done.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I'd like to take a vote on.
Do we want do we want to move them as a package? Just would that be easier, Matthew?
Certainly would, if the committee is okay with that.
Yeah, I think we're okay with that. So why don't we just vote on the no notes as a package? All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. I guess we need a motion to
Receive the presentations.
receive the presentations. All in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Thanks, members, and we'll see you on the 19th for the next meeting. Lots of reading. Bye-bye.